Thanks for tuning in. You're listening to the Embrace Mental Health podcast,
where we embrace a not-so-clinical approach
to conversations surrounding all things mental health. Hello and happy Mental Health Monday, everybody. Hope you got your clocks changed, although that's not really like an actual issue anymore because everybody just has phones, so they just change. But
this is the last year.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. Yeah. That's right.
How exciting.
Thank God.
It's about time.
As like a kid, I feel like it didn't really affect me, and then as an adult, it takes me like a month to get over it. Like it's ratchet. It's awful.
Totally.
But anyway, hopefully everyone's endured their last daylight savings well. But
I hope I'm not wrong on that, like giving people false hope. I'm pretty sure I'm right.
No, give it time. There's still time for change. Okay. But yes, here's hoping.
Back check that one.
All right. So today's topic is therapy. But before we get to that, we'll start with our question. So today's question is, what advice would you give to your 16-year-old self?
So I'll start.
Oh, go ahead, Autumn.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so I'll start. My name is Autumn. I'm one of your co-hosts. Advice that I would give to my 16-year-old self is to, even though it wouldn't help her, just to know that high school is so overrated. Like, once you get out of there, like, who's popular, who's not popular, it doesn't matter. It doesn't change. Like, it does not affect your life as you get older. And then I think another, like, really important thing is just to go to therapy. You need it, baby girl. You desperately need it. So, yeah.
All right, so I'll go next. My name is Kelsey, and if I were to approach 16-year-old Kelsey right now, I would tell her to stop wearing so much macrame jewelry, because I wore that for such a long time, but really got stuck in the 90s. But on top of that, I think probably what I would most say would be to focus more so on cultivating happiness rather than chasing it. I feel like there was so much time that I spent thinking, like, if I can just get that next thing, then I'll be happy, versus just wherever I was, like, choosing to cultivate happiness in that stage rather than chasing after it, if that makes sense. So I feel like it took me a long time to figure that out. Honestly, only within the last, like, couple of years do I feel like that focus has changed, but it's been pretty life-changing to me of like, oh, I don't have to get that next thing in order to be happy. I can just cultivate happiness here. And if that other thing comes along, then I can still be cultivating happiness. And that's I don't know, something that's been helpful.
That's so good. Someone should give you a mic and a pulpit. That's good.
Why not a podcast?
There you go.
Yeah. So I love both your answers. I just want to say I love that because, like, you know, usually with this question, the typical kind of cheating answer is like, okay, you know, here's this thing that I want to tell you that's going to happen in the future. Mm-hmm. And here's how to avoid it, or here's how to, you know, prepare for this specific thing. And neither of you said that. And I wasn't going to say that either because, I don't know, I just feel like life happens, you know, the way that it happens. And I don't want to create like an alternate timeline that ruins everything, Back to the Future style. But mine would be, I would introduce myself to the world of mindfulness, concepts and practice, because that totally changed my life. And that really came along. I was probably 23 or maybe 24. I had probably just turned 24 when I started learning about that and practicing it. And over the years, it has had such incredible ripple effects in my life. I was so not self-aware and not present at 16. I was just always off somewhere else. And that caused all kinds of problems in my personal life. And so I feel like I would just have benefited so much from that. So there we go.
You should.
And Autumn, also, I would have benefited from therapy too, which is of course on topic. But what were you going to say?
I was going to say you should also introduce yourself to our podcast listeners.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. My name is Wesley. Yeah, my name's Wesley. Perfect. And I'm another co-host.
Sounds good.
All right. So, speaking of therapy, that is our topic for today, is just kind of all things therapy, because there's a lot of misinformation out there and there's somewhat a lack of information out there too, where it can be hard to kind of figure out what it is that you want to know about therapy. So, all right. So, to answer a few basic questions about therapy, first of all, what is therapy? I think broadly, therapy is really just it's a mental health treatment at its bare minimum of understanding. But there's obviously all sorts of different ways that people practice therapy. So I don't know, Wes, I feel like, not to cop out here and go straight to the professional, but what would you?
Yeah. Well, actually, this is such. I think this is such an important question. I have a whole like little page on my website dedicated to this for my private practice. But yeah, basically, therapy. The way that I think of therapy, because it can be practiced in a lot of ways. Obviously, like talking is usually a big part of it, but that's not even necessarily the case with every therapist. And so, I would say it is meeting with a mental health professional to try to better cope with your problems, or try to improve your life in some way. And so I think it's when I think of what it is, I think about how it's not like medical. It's not going to the doctor, and it's not like focused on a religion. So it's not like going to a pastor or other spiritual leader. I think it helped. I think you really have to think about similar kinds of industries and practices that are different, and what is the difference. So yeah, because those people also help with life's problems. But
Yeah,
that's what
I
I think
think
about it.
a lot of people, when if they've never been or don't know about therapy, they like tend to think of either the whole laying on the couch thing, like, or looking at ink blots or that kind of thing, or the Peanuts, going up to, who is it? It's not Lucy. Oh my gosh. I can picture her.
Isn't it? I think it is Lucy.
Is it Lucy? Okay.
The one who pulls the football.
Yes, okay, Lucy.
Yeah, that's Lucy.
Okay,
Wait,
Sally's the sister. Okay.
I'm missing a reference here. What is Peanuts?
Charlie Brown.
Charlie Brown,
and Snoopy,
yeah.
and all them.
I've never seen Charlie Brown.
Okay. Where she has like this little, basically a lemonade stand, but instead of selling lemonade, she gives I think she says it's the psychiatrist for 5 cents. So
That's funny.
yes. And basically just tells Charlie Brown he's dumb. So,
Which actually is, even though these days that's not how psychiatry works, when Peanuts comics and videos were coming out, psychiatry was really the only name in the game when it came to therapy. So that would have been the reference. Yep.
very interesting.
So, but that's not what it looks like these days.
That's true.
And the lemonade stand is never what it looked like. Yeah, but yeah,
That's
unless
true.
you've been to it, I think that a lot of people, it's this kind of big, confusing thing. And what are the words? Therapy, psychology, psychiatry, psychotherapy, counseling. My friend, he's a social worker. Like, what is that? So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like what I've experienced in like the Black community is therapy is like perceived as this space where you go to like just gush about your feelings, and the idea of like a shrink, like someone who's just trying to like figure you out. It's a very like invasive thing that is what would be the word? Just like unnecessary and weak, and yeah, just a space where you go where like someone invades your thoughts and like tells you how you feel, essentially.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which that's also not what it is.
Yeah, and one more cliche, I think, would be the whole, how does that make you feel? Right? I think
Yep.
we've all come across that before. And that actually isn't a bad question. And there are probably some therapists out there who overuse it and focus on that too much. I would say that another misconception is that that a therapist is really just there to like validate you and tell you about how you're right and just like let you vent. and support you in everything that you do 100%. And that's not what good therapy is. Again, there might be a few out there who unfortunately practice that way.
Right.
Again, just like some doctors, I think we can all agree, are probably a little bit better at what they do than others. That's the case with therapists too. But I would say that that's not what good therapy is, and that's probably not what the majority of it is either. There is some challenging, there is some, you're saying this, but that doesn't seem to be working out for you. So it's not quite what it is either. So let's talk about what it is.
Yes. So I guess to touch on a little bit, like I said, we've got a lot of stuff that I'd love for us to share today, but to try and keep it a little succinct, but still, there are obviously different types of therapy too. I definitely remember in my psychology class, learning all about Freud, and that's the only one I remember from college at this point, but there's a... Okay, yeah.
Carl Rogers, all of it, yeah.
Yes, Wesley, please inform me after I forgot everything. But
well, I finished a little more recently perhaps, so we'll say that's the issue. But there's so many different theories and approaches, and so from one therapist to the next, they're going to have different preferences and different training and background, and just kind of a different idea of what it even is and how it works. And I would say probably that most therapists would agree that, there are very few fundamentalist therapists out there, I think, in the field who are like, no, this is the real helpful, true way of therapy, and everybody else is just wasting their time. I think that the vast majority of us are aware that different types of therapy work better for different therapists because we all have our own views of the world and things that work for us in ways that we can feel authentic, which is probably one of the most important factors. And I would say also that we all agree that it's not a one-size-fits-all for every client. It depends on the client's personality and history and preferences and needs and challenges. So in fact, I think, and I don't remember this statistic precisely, but I think that at least half, if not more than half of therapists consider themselves eclectic in some way. Like they're not strictly one school of therapy, and they either take a whole bunch of them and let it inform the way that they generally do therapy, or they say, I operate mostly out of these 3 or 4 or 5 types of therapy to suit my client's needs.
Yeah. I think another piece too, I think that Wes can kind of speak on a little bit too, is kind of the difference between one-on-one therapy and group therapy. Because Wes, I know you've led some groups too, so.
I have, and I love group work. It's fantastic. So one of the most, I think, interesting and important factors out there, at least when it comes to research, is that on average for most people, group therapy is just as effective as individual therapy, which I love that because, and it's different, it's effective in different ways, but from a client perspective, it's like, because sometimes groups are a little bit more affordable because you've got everybody contributing to make the group happen. And so there's that. Some people feel most comfortable in a group, and some people feel most comfortable in individual therapy. You probably know who you are. If you think about one or the other, it's pretty clear to most people, like one makes them a little more comfortable than the other as an idea. And honestly, from a therapist perspective too, it's like, I can hold this group and charge them a little bit less than I would for an hour of individual therapy, but still make it worth my time. So it's kind of a win-win, I guess, from the financial piece, which I've got to be honest, is important for most of us. And so, individual therapy, of course, the benefits are that it's tailored to you and what you need, and the time is focused on you. And so that can be a better fit for some people in some situations. The great thing about groups is that there's what's called this kind of group dynamic, this healing dynamic of just being with other people who are going through something that you can relate to. That in itself can be incredibly healing. And that sounds like it's hard to define and measure, and it really is, but the results are what they are. And so that's a really cool thing to be able to witness as a therapist and to experience as a group member. There's a lot of support groups out there for specific kinds of issues. And one other quick thing I'll mention that has to do with groups and individual therapy is that there's research out there that shows that for most people, therapy works more effectively and more quickly when you feel like you identify with the people who are working with you. So whether it's your racial background, your race, your ethnic background, your gender, your whatever that looks like for you, your age. It's not by any means the biggest determining factor, but it does have some effect for quite a few people if your therapist is somebody who you feel like you can relate to in that way. And I would say the same thing goes for groups. Obviously, it's a little harder to get everybody homogenous, and that might not even be what you want. But I think that the most important thing when it comes to that is how quickly can you build trust and rapport with the people who you're with. And naturally, for most of us, if we feel like the other person has an idea of what we've been through, what we're talking about, a lot of life experience overlap, then we're going to maybe let our guards down, open up, and get some work done a little more quickly.
Yeah.
So with groups also, that has to do with what is the issue that we're talking about. So if you go to a general therapy group, that can be super helpful for some people. But if you can find a group specific to whether it's grief or addiction or whatever it is for you, then again, you might get your work done a little bit more quickly than a general therapy group. Relationships, whatever it is.
Yeah. All right, so the next question to kind of cover a little bit is, who does therapy? So this was an interesting topic to kind of research a little bit, because when you think about mental health practitioners, there are so many titles out there. And even with somebody I have a degree in the mental health field, and even that was a little bit confusing of trying to figure out the difference between all these different things. But I think essentially they all kind of can be broken down into three general categories. You have psychiatrists, you have psychologists, and psychotherapists. That kind of are three. There's still some overlap between those three groups, but those are kind of some distinction, some line of distinction between that. So I remember college, I think it was my master's program, was the first time that I figured out that a psychiatrist was actually somebody with a medical degree, and that they can prescribe medications, and psychologists and psychotherapists cannot. That was a learning curve for me. You have to have a medical degree in order to prescribe medication. And so that's one of the kind of niche areas for psychiatrists, is that they kind of have that understanding of both the psychological piece of it, but then also the medical piece of it, to understand how best to prescribe medication. Now, that being said, I would guess, this is me making something up, so don't hold me to it, but I would guess most people, when they get prescribed a medication, is from their general practitioner, their doctor. Most people don't have to go to a psychiatrist in order to get medication, but psychiatrists can be helpful for if you are having a difficult time finding the right combinations of medications or the right dosages or stuff. They have a little bit more expertise in it than your general doctor would. And so
yeah, they're like the specialists when it comes to mental health related drugs, psychotropic drugs. Yeah.
Psychotropic. Yeah. What does psychotropic mean, Wes?
If I researched this ahead of time, I could break down the word. But it's just any kind of drugs that is designed to have an effect on your mental health, basically. Yes.
And we have an episode coming up soon that's all about medication, so we can do our research before that
there
a little
we go.
bit. But yeah. And then in terms of psychologists, psychologists are people who typically have a PhD in the field of psychology. And this one is one that is still a little bit hazy for me to understand quite what the difference is between a psychologist and somebody who studies psychology but is a psychotherapist. But
I think I can shed some light on that, because the way that you broke it down into those three categories, I think that that's a way of explaining the different fields and what they actually do for their jobs. And yeah, psychiatrists, by the way, any of those can be a psychotherapist. A psychiatrist can be a psychotherapist. It's just that there's such a demand for psychiatrists who are prescribing medication that's kind of the de facto what almost all of them spend their time doing. And psychologists, many psychologists are psychotherapists, but I think that psychology as a field of practice would be mostly focused on studying the harder science piece of it, studying behavior and thinking, and also assessments and research, kind of the more academic side of things, as opposed to the more kind of individual people helping healer side of things.
Okay.
So psychologists can go into one field or the other, but another way of breaking it down, and I think this will segue into talking about psychotherapists as well, is by what is their field of study, what is their background in education. Because again, psychiatrists can be therapists, and when I say therapist, just to be clear, I'm just kind of shortening the word psychotherapy, and because of course there's physical therapists and occupational therapists, and so depending on where you are and who you're around, a therapist could mean something different. But for the purpose of this podcast episode, therapist means psychotherapist or talk therapist. So so they can be therapists. Also, I am a licensed professional counselor, and so my degree is in clinical mental health counseling. And so I think therapists, one factor to keep in mind is like in your state, you have to be licensed to be able to be a therapist. And there are certain fields of study that you can be certified in, usually with at least a master's degree, in order to be able to be a licensed therapist. So I am a counselor by background, and I am a therapist by trade. Social workers can be therapists in the state of Michigan where we're at. Psychologists can be therapists, and psychiatrists can be therapists. And I think that that's about it. There are some spiritual ministers and stuff who can call what they do counseling, but they are not therapists. And I know in other states, the big name in the field is like a marriage and family therapist, but they don't typically just do marriage and family therapy in that state. So a lot of it is like a state-by-state thing, and it wouldn't hurt to do just a little bit of research if you're looking into this, especially if you're not in Michigan, where we're going to be focusing on what these different fields are. But yeah, basically, so psychiatrists, you can think about the medical degree and that side of things. Psychologists as a field of practice is the studying and the science, and then a therapist is like what you think about sitting in a room talking with someone, helping you out, going to therapy.
Yeah. And I think it can get confusing with all the different terms, but like you said, it's kind of just the different field of study that got you to that place a little bit. I even asked my therapist, who I believe is has a master's in social work, but asked her, okay, what's the difference between a therapist and a counselor? And she said, nothing. And there's, when it comes down to it, there's not much difference, but there might be some differences in like the point, like what they cover in their schooling or focus. Yeah. But ultimately they really have pretty similar goals and pretty similar ways of accomplishing those goals. So
yeah. Yep, I would say so. If you go to one therapist versus another, their educational background isn't probably going to make a huge impact. Like there's more differences between one social worker and another than there are between like all social workers and all counselors or something like that, right? So that doesn't have to be the main determining factor. I think just in general, social workers are more, like their education is more focused on, and Kelsey, of course, you can confirm or deny this, but like resources and state programs and these kinds of things, helping people in these areas. Whereas as a counselor, we learned very little about that. We did learn a little bit about resourcing and referring people and things like that, but we really specialize in therapy. Like that is what our whole program is focused on. And then psychologists have more focus again on the behavioral and hard science and research aspect of things in general. But then when you get to the PhD level, social workers and counselors are also pretty focused on that stuff.
Yeah. I think too, to kind of branch into our next topic a little bit, I think it used to be that social workers could take different insurances than a master's in counseling could, but from what I've heard is that that's changing. That I think social workers were able to take Medicaid and masters in counseling weren't, but I have heard that is changing, and so even that distinction is not. That
has changed, yes.
Okay, already changed.
At least, so it's a state-by-state thing, once again, and a lot of it has to do with political lobbying, who has the political power for the state to allow people to, take different, especially when you're talking about state insurances like you just were. So, counselors can also take Medicaid and Medicare. I'm guessing that psychologists can as well. Social workers used to be the big, powerful group in Michigan, and there's actually still some interesting political dynamics. Just a couple of years ago, I actually went to Lansing to join a group of counselors, LPCs, who were at the state capitol because essentially, and I don't want to speak badly about psychologists because there are many great ones out there, but psychologists in Michigan as a field were trying to basically convince state legislators that counselors were not qualified to diagnose people. And if we got our ability to diagnose taken away legally, that would be a huge problem. And if you look at our field of study, that's simply not the case. Thankfully, the legislators agreed. So, but anyway, so it's just interesting how the political piece plays into almost everything.
Like West Side Story right now, like gangs of mental health practitioners like fighting
right
over.
Like these like chill like mental health counselors rioting with signs and pitchforks.
Oh man.
But I think that counselors can't work for the VA. I think is like the only thing left in Michigan, at least speaking for my own field. I can't speak as much as the others.
Interesting. So the next piece that we'll try not to spend too much time on, just because it's, I don't know, I don't like talking about insurance a whole lot, but in terms of how does insurance work in terms of therapy?
That's another one I'd love to speak to. I own a private practice. This is a whole thing. So, and actually at my practice, I think I mentioned on a previous podcast, I actually don't accept insurance. And that's actually what more and more therapists are moving toward, but still the vast majority do take therapists or take insurance, excuse me. So, I'm pulling these numbers off the top of my head, but you might say that like 10 or 15% don't. And that might have grown from 5 to 10% in the last several years. So it's still the minority. So basically your therapist has to get paid for what they do in order for it to be their job, right? So the question is, how are they going to get paid? And most of them, just like going to the doctor, they accept different insurances and they have to get basically paneled and audited by these insurance companies so that the insurance company can say, yes, we will go ahead. We've verified that this person knows what they're doing and we'll pay for your sessions with them. And so then the insurance company, because they have the money, they have the power in this situation, for better or worse, they dictate how many sessions they'll pay for and how often you can go. So I would say that the standard is probably 10 to 20 sessions within an insurance year. I would say more and more are moving to 20 sessions. And they'll only pay for certain types of therapy that are considered evidence-based. And so I don't want to get into the deep weeds, but it can get kind of messy because sometimes, for instance, certain insurance companies will say, yeah, we'll only pay for these dozen or so approaches to therapy. And if a therapist doesn't practice in one of those typically, then they have to either practice outside of their element or fudge their paperwork a little bit that the insurance companies review, and they'll kind of just translate like, yeah, what I did, we could consider it that. and I don't think that it's any secret in this industry that a lot of therapists do that so that they can practice in the way that they believe will benefit the client and also get paid to do it. So it's kind of a win-win, but it's also kind of shady. So yeah, the reasons that I don't take insurance and that many other therapists are not doing that, more and more I should say are not, is that we want to be in control of the way that we practice. How long are we going to see this person for? How often are we going to see them? And just kind of do it our own way, and also not be under the stress because again, insurance companies can review your paperwork at any time. Again, it's coming from a good place. They want to make sure that things are on the up and up, and that they're not paying somebody to not be effective. That's a positive way of looking at what they do. But from a therapist and client perspective, your paperwork is not totally confidential because the insurance companies can look at it. Mm-hmm. And also, if the therapist doesn't sort of dot an I or cross a T in their paperwork in the way that the insurance companies are looking for, then they can say, hey, we're actually not going to pay for that session. And the therapist has to pay them back. So I don't take insurance, so I don't have to stress about that either, which I hope is helpful for my clients too, that I'm not like, I'm working for you. I'm not working for the insurance companies. But of course, the downside of not taking insurance is that some people can't pay for therapy straight up, cash pay, like here I am and I'm going to pay this fee, as opposed to just paying a small, like $25 copay or whatever it would be through your insurance. Yeah. So that's as much as I can abbreviate that whole discussion, I guess. I don't know. I want to check it, Autumn. We haven't heard from you too much, and so I just want to check and see if you have anything to add or any questions or whatever.
Yeah, just for our listeners to know, all of my experience comes from, or all of like anything that I can offer to the podcast really comes from experience in like being in therapy and all that stuff, as opposed to like the academic perspective. So that's why I have a little less to say for this episode. But I ended up doing an outpatient program after I did an inpatient program. I had to do an outpatient program, and I remember one of the days there was a girl that came in that was in the group therapy, and she was just really upset because she had read her file, and it was, let's just say I read my file later on, and I was like, heavens, because it's very clinical, like all of the terms that are used, the way that it's talked about. And I think it was the social worker, she was trying to explain to us, she was like, I really encourage you not to read your files because we have to put like very specific things to show that you need to be here, so your insurance company will pay for it. And so I remember thinking like, okay, yeah, I'm not going to read my file anymore, because like you were saying, Wes, like the insurance companies can be so picky about what they will cover. And so in order to make sure that we are actually getting our sessions covered, and like everyone there, because everyone there was in crisis mode, everyone there can like actually continue coming. They were putting down like to the nitty gritty of essentially what's wrong with us, what's going on with us. So yeah.
You reminded me of one other important factor with this, and that is that again, insurance companies are more and more people are aware that they're notorious for like wanting to only pay for things if they feel like they don't have any other choice, basically. And that's a more cynical way of looking at it. And so, therapists have to be very clear that, this person needs therapy. Yeah. And part of that is that you have to diagnose somebody with a mental health disorder out of the DSM, which we talked about, I think, a few episodes ago. And so, that's another area where even if my own approach, because I don't typically diagnose my clients, not that they wouldn't all necessarily qualify for a disorder, that's just not the way that I operate. And I think that a lot of therapists don't necessarily see therapy in that way, like you have this illness and we're going to treat it with these kinds of things. That's what insurance companies are looking for, because it's a medical model. So you would have to say, oh, they have this mental illness, even if the therapist, if they're being totally honest, like, I don't see you as a person with a mental illness or with a specific mental illness, but again, I got to get paid for what I do. So
yeah. So the next little piece that I kind of wanted to cover a little bit is kind of the difference between in-person and this kind of relatively new thing called telehealth. And it's kind of an interesting thing, because I believe before COVID, there was some discrepancy on whether telehealth was even allowed, right? Or whether that was billable. Was that true?
That's the main thing, is insurance going to pay for it? I think that's another state-by-state issue in terms of legality. I think that in some states, telehealth was seen, and I think in Michigan it was generally like kind of considered a gray area. It was something that like the laws and the ethics boards and stuff were still catching up to in terms of technology. And so it was a gray area before COVID. And in other states, I think it was totally accepted. In other states, it was like absolutely not. Most states were somewhere in between. But yeah, of course, since the pandemic, it's like, okay, we have all these people and they either need to like risk getting COVID. Or...
We have a lot of people who need mental health assistance.
More than ever. Exactly. So I think that most states, certainly Michigan, was kind of like, we're still maybe not 100% on board with this. We're going to be figuring this out still. But in the meantime, y'all need to go to therapy. So just go for it. It's kind of the Wild West in terms of telehealth. That's the way it was for a while. And I think most therapists offer telehealth options now for that reason, because we can reach people who we couldn't normally reach. I can treat anybody anywhere in the state, which is fantastic. I'm working with somebody in the Ann Arbor area, and I'm up in the Macomb area, and so couldn't do that. Probably, I don't think this person would be driving to me. And so that's a win for the therapist and for the client, because you have a lot bigger pool of therapists to choose from. Yeah. That's another thing, is that on average, research has shown so far that telehealth is equally effective to in-person. So that's kind of interesting. I will say, as a therapist, I think I can speak for most therapists when I say that we're a little bit more comfortable generally with the one, like the in-person, because there's all kinds of nonverbals that are easier to pick up on. But hey, again, the numbers don't lie. If it works, it works. And so I would encourage you, if you're listening to this, to not let the telehealth aspect scare you away if you think that that's going to, if that's going to be way easier for you. And then there's a convenience factor. Some therapists prefer the convenience factor of like, hey, I could just sit in my home office and treat people from all across my state. Let's go for it. And so some of them mind more than others, just like clients.
Yeah. I can speak on this a little bit personally too, because the therapist that I started seeing in 2020, it was through telehealth, and I've been seeing her for over 3 years now, and it's all been through telehealth. I have never met her in person, and if you had asked me before I started that, would I prefer in-person or would I prefer telehealth, I probably would have said, I prefer in-person, but it's been incredibly effective for me, and I wouldn't say it's really been a deterrent. And in a lot of ways, it is more convenient. When you take the travel piece out of it, there are a lot of people who are very busy. And so if that's a piece of why you're not considering therapy is because you don't think you have time, seriously consider telehealth, because it's not as weird as you think it's going to be. It's not like a Zoom meeting. I think that's what everybody is afraid is going to be it's going to be awkward, one-on-one Zoom, but it's really not. This has been very effective for me and very helpful for me. And honestly, I had a counselor before that I used to drive an hour to go see, but it wasn't particularly convenient. And so,
Save a couple hours every time now. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's, again, Wes and I talked about this a little bit in our podcast about stress, but really, what's the best form of therapy for you? Whatever one you'll actually do. So if you have the space and time for telehealth and you don't for in-person, then try telehealth, I don't know. Yeah. Autumn, do you have any personal experience in that, or have you mostly been, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I've experienced both in-person and telehealth, and both of them have been beneficial kind of in the same ways. There hasn't really been that big of a difference. I will say now my life looks different because I do work in school from home. And so I actually just ended up switching therapists for multiple reasons. But in my switch, I was originally seeing someone telehealth. And I was like, okay, now I'm going to prioritize seeing someone in person, because I spend my entire day at my desk staring at a computer. The last thing that I want to do is now process my trauma through this same laptop that I'm typing my papers on, And so it really, it's nice to have the option, to balance your life out, because if you are someone who's super busy, going around town all the time, being able to come home and stay home and do therapy has also been super convenient. So 10 out of 10 would recommend either one.
I will say,
and I just want to say real quick, a lot of therapists who offer both, you actually can kind of bounce back and forth from one and then the other. So maybe you want to do in-person as your default, but then maybe you're feeling a little under the weather, or you have something right after that you have to do. You can do telehealth as a backup.
The other benefit of telehealth is that my dog tries to get in on the session too and sees if she can get some things covered. Unfortunately, she doesn't have insurance, so she hasn't had her own sessions yet, but she certainly tries to steal in on mine. So
the therapist's like, that's going to be an extra $40 to get your dog some therapy there.
Exactly. Yeah.
One other statistic I think is important to share for those who are looking into therapy and trying to navigate this whole thing. You might have heard of different approaches to therapy, like we were referencing earlier, like cognitive behavioral therapy, or interpersonal therapy, or EMDR, or internal family systems, or whatever. There's all these different approaches, and again, research shows, amazingly, the number one thing that therapy-related research has shown is that therapy is effective. And we actually have here in our notes that 75% of people find it to be effective. That's pretty good numbers when it comes to research like this.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that, and I mean, this is good research. This isn't like therapists, saying that therapy is effective, right? This is like independent and blind studies and all these kinds of things. So it's legit. But then the second most proven thing, or proven if you want to use that word, in research is that on average, all different approaches to therapy are equally effective. And so there are certain types of therapy that are more measurable, like cognitive behavioral therapists love to say that we're the most research backed types of therapy. And I do some CBT myself, and so I'm not against cognitive behavioral therapy. But the reality is that it's the most research backed because it's actually designed to be measurable, like step by step by step. And so it's like, yeah, we can say that this thing affects this thing in this way because of this. And a lot of other approaches to therapy can't necessarily do that. It's a little bit more, it feels a little more loosey-goosey or whatever. But in my personal opinion, the most important thing, again, is does it work? And there are some types of therapy, for instance, I do EMDR, which is shown on average to be the most effective for trauma-related issues. So there are specific problems that specific types of therapy approaches are considered the most effective for. But again, by and large, I would venture to say 85, 90+% of the time, it's like, you don't let that be the determining factor. Do what makes sense to you. So maybe you're more of an empirically minded kind of person. So you want something where you can look at the data and see, I understand that this is shown to be effective in these ways. Do CBT or something that is designed that way. Or maybe some other type of therapy, it's like, oh no, I just want them to just kind of let me go, look more into person-centered therapy. Whether or not you believe it's helpful is actually a really important factor in how effective it's going to be, believe it or not. So.
All right, so 2 questions that I have left for this episode. I feel like we could have 3 parts on this, but to try and... So, one question is, what would you guys say is the biggest difference between seeing an actual therapist or just talking to a friend or talking to your mom? Because I think that's a lot of people are like, oh, I don't really need to go to therapy because I have a good friend that I talk to. So the first thing that comes to my mind is, when I think of the difference between the people who I generally will vent to or process with, who's not my therapist, the first thing I would say is that it's not an either or situation. Like, once you go to therapy, it doesn't mean that you can't still talk to your mom or, like, you need all forms of support.
Yeah.
But some of the biggest differences I've noticed between talking to my mom or talking to my therapist about an issue is just kind of that objectivity piece. Obviously, first of all, when I talk to my mom, my mom is the person who I probably talk to the most. But, there's a certain level of which I might frame things in a different way, or I might hold some things back. But there's also a certain way in which my mom sees me a little bit differently than might be reality. Obviously,
sure.
I'm the way she has a tendency to want to protect me or that kind of thing. Whereas, like, my therapist is more likely to, not be cruel to me by any stretch of the imagination, but, like, talk turkey with me a little bit more than, like, my mom might in a certain situation. Or, there's also a level in which I'm a little bit more unfiltered with my therapist because, like, I don't know this person. Like I said, I've never even met her in person. And so, I feel a little bit more free to just kind of put it all out there and not feel like I am putting any sort of interpersonal relationship in jeopardy by oversharing or that kind of thing. But yeah.
It's her job to not be offended by you. Whereas, like, if you're talking to your mom, you might say things a little bit differently, or like, hey, I'm not sure I quite want my mom to know about this specific thing. Or whatever.
Yeah, I would say for me personally, the way that my brain works is I really value understanding something. And so in therapy, that translates, I really value in understanding myself and having, again, this is different for every person, but like having terms, or like someone who has like an academic background and is able to like explain like what my nervous system is actually doing, or how my brain is responding, or why I'm responding the way that I'm responding, is just a benefit that most of my friends and family members that aren't mental health professionals, they're not trained in that. And so I think just like someone who has actual knowledge is just been super, super beneficial for me. But then also, like, I feel like I am really lucky because I have a great set of people around me that have good listening ears. But for a lot of people, like, listening is not a skill that a lot of people experience from the people around them. Mm-hmm. And so you have someone who is literally certified, trained to listen well, to ask good questions, to help lead you to a place of understanding yourself better and working through things, as opposed to someone who might just not be a good listener because, hey, some people aren't good listeners, you know?
Yeah, or they want to talk about themselves. It's like, oh, you know, I heard you say this, and let me tell you about this thing that I went through. And it's like, okay, and we're no longer helping me. Yeah. In fact, I honestly think that a huge part of the effectiveness of therapy is like, we're going to sit down for an hour and completely focus on you and these challenge, like the therapist, unless they feel like it's going to somehow help you, you know, build like a rapport or a trust with you. They're not sharing from their own life. And if they are, it's in a way that's like, I'm saying this to help you feel like it's normal, or like I actually do understand what you're talking about, right? But a lot of people, and this is just natural conversation, they want to talk about themselves, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that's that's a huge part of what makes therapy effective. Like you said, there's the training that you can, you know, might help you feel a little more confident about it, and rightly so. And it is a rare, special thing to have people in your life who will actually listen and can have empathy and aren't going to be judging you. And this is really the foundation of what any good therapist is going to do. And I mean, they're going to have a treatment plan, like a care plan for you. And here's my client's goals, and here's exactly what we're going to be working on to achieve those goals. I mean, where do you get that in your day-to-day life? So there's lots of reasons why therapy can go above and beyond. But I would say, and Autumn, you mentioned this, I don't know if it was before the podcast or after we started, but that really I think almost anybody, or really maybe anybody, could benefit from therapy. Now, I'm not under the delusion that everybody like needs therapy. I would say that there's plenty of people out there who can cope with their day-to-day life without going to therapy, right? But most of them would still benefit. And there's a lot of people who, like, in order to live in a way that they feel is functional and fulfilling and happy and stuff, therapy could be a huge help for them.
Yeah, that actually segues us into our last question, which was, who needs therapy? And Wes stole the thunder a little bit there. No, I'm just kidding.
I wasn't looking at the notes, but
he's just that good.
The outline was that good, yeah.
But I think one of the biggest, mentality shifts that we need just in general is, I think a lot of times when we think about, do I need therapy, it's almost like we have it in the same understanding of like, do I need to go to the emergency room? Like, you don't want to do therapy unless you absolutely have to. It's last resort. You have to try everything else first. And unless it's really, really bad, until then, I don't need therapy. But I think the better question that we can ask ourselves is, would therapy help me in this situation? It's not so much as, is it bad enough that I need to go to therapy? It's, could therapy be helpful to me in this situation? And the reality is like, a lot of times it could be helpful. You don't have to wait until things are really, really bad in order to, go and find somebody to talk to. And I think about, in terms of just even other kinds of therapy, like, for instance, I have started physical therapy recently for my knee. And, I got this knee injury 10 years ago and just kind of kept not dealing with it. Just kind of, it wasn't bad enough that I needed to go to the doctor, really. I was like, I don't think I need surgery or anything, so I'll just kind of keep limping around and it's fine. And the face that I get from my physical therapist now, where they're like, so wait, when did you get this? And I was like, 10 years ago, kind of a thing. And the reality is if I had pursued physical therapy 10 years ago, I probably could have saved myself a lot of pain and suffering. And I think that's true for psychotherapy as well, is that it's not so much, is it bad enough that I need to do it, but can you save yourself a little bit of pain and suffering? And that, to me is a better mentality to have towards therapy rather than waiting until it's an emergency or you have to reach this certain threshold of not being able to handle your situation. Yeah. You don't have to go to rock bottom. It doesn't have to be that deep because, at this point, like I'm feeling like I'm in a pretty good place in terms of my mental health, but I'm still going to therapy every single week. And it's because I still find it beneficial for just the little things that are coming up right now. It doesn't have to be a state of emergency in order for you to, really the question is, could it help me? Could it be beneficial? Could it help me, kind of, what's the word I'm trying to think? Like function in a better way. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I don't know if y'all have ever heard that question before. Like if you had 30 seconds to broadcast a message to the entire world, what would it be? That would be the message. Because honestly, that's why I said, my 16-year-old self, I would tell her to go to therapy. This idea of being proactive instead of reactive.
Yes.
I feel like we have that issue, with health in general, at least in our country. I don't know about the rest of the world, but man, I don't know. At least the people around me, going to the doctor is not something that they want to do. And it's the idea of setting yourself up for success,
yes,
as opposed to waiting for the downfall and then being like, all right, now I need help.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I totally get where you're coming from, Wes, where you're like, not everyone needs therapy. I definitely always say that everybody needs therapy. That's just me. I think the idea of everyone can benefit from it is a really good way to word that. And I would say just as an encouragement to anyone listening to this, whether you've tried therapy and it hasn't worked or you haven't gone to therapy because of XYZ reason, I would encourage you to do your research on the different types of therapy without putting the pressure on yourself to know exactly which one you need without putting the pressure on yourself to know exactly which one will be the most helpful to you. But do your research and then it's so hard, but be okay with trying different therapists in different types of therapy. Mm-hmm. I have so many people who have gone to therapy and it just was a really bad experience for them. They're like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that again. And it makes me so sad because I'm like, there's so many options, there's so many different types of therapy and so many different types of therapists. Just keep trying until you find the right fit, because once you do, it's going to be so beneficial. I truly, 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 truly believe it. And don't be afraid to try some of those non-traditional types of therapy, like sand play or play therapy, art therapy. As someone I was very cynical. I was like, yeah, there's no way me playing in the sand is gonna do anything, And then 30 minutes later, I'm crying because I'm playing in the sand and it's revealing something, It's it's kind of it's interesting. So don't be afraid to just if something's not working out or if you just want to try something new, try some of the non-traditional approaches as well. That's my TED Talk.
Hey, well said. I don't have too much to add, but I think I think that your metaphor or your analogy, Kelsey, of physical therapy is such a good one. That's one thing that I try to communicate to people who are looking into therapy is basically okay, how much pain could you save yourself if you address this now as opposed to later?
Yes.
It's going to be easier to climb out of the pit now instead of later. It's going to take less time to get to a place where you feel stable, or whatever word you want to use. And actually it can set you up for success. There's that time factor. You could start living in a way that you're happy with, maybe 3-6 months from now instead of a year and a half, 2 years from now. And who knows what that'll affect for you down the road. So there's that piece. And Autumn, absolutely. I would just wanted to highlight that you it's for better or worse, it's very normal to have to kind of shop around for the right therapist, right? You're not going to necessarily feel like you're the best fit for every single therapist, any therapist out there. It's very normal to have to look for 2 or 3, even up to 4, 5, 6. I hate to say, because it is a pain. It can be a pain, and hopefully this podcast can make it a little bit less of a pain because you have a little easier idea of what you're looking for and what it's all about. But Yeah, but I would say at least give it 2 or 3, and then also it's good to give it like at least a good 3 sessions, if not more, because usually always the first session, often even the second session, just like intake stuff, like going over your history and all these kind of general like question and answer kind of things, and you'll get a taste for what the actual week-to-week therapy is going to look like at least by the 3rd session, and you might want to give it, like a new medication, give it a good 6 weeks even.
Right.
I know there's the financial piece of this too, and I didn't want to not mention also that a lot of therapists work on sliding scales, and so if finances are a significant problem for you, especially if you're working with someone who doesn't take your insurance or you can't afford the copay or something, a sliding scale basically just means they take into account how much income do you have, and are they able to offer you a spot at a lower price or whatever. So I would say that for, again, easily 99% of people out there, there is an option out there for you. It's going to be easier for some people to find a therapist than others, whether it's because of insurance or finances or location or just kind of who you are. But, I think there's somebody out there for everyone.
Yep.
Absolutely.
All right, so that wraps up this first session about therapy, but a little spoiler alert, I guess. The first episode of every month, we are going to be continuing to talk about therapy-related topics for this first season. So this was just the initial kind of covering our basics, but the first episode of every single month, we're going to be diving even deeper into some of these topics because, as Autumn said, Autumn and I think Wes is on the same page with us too, but like, I really truly believe that basically just about everybody could benefit from therapy, and I think it's a really important topic. So I want to make sure that we cover a lot of things with it because I think it could help prevent a lot of extra pain for people that they don't have to go through. So
absolutely. Yeah, to I guess kind of close our episode out in the spirit of, what can I do to kind of save myself some pain in the future on a smaller scale with the season change, daylight savings, days getting shorter, the sun is out a lot less, it's getting colder, so maybe you can't go outside as much. I know all of this I'm saying, people are probably getting sadder and sadder as I'm just talking. But my question is, what can you do, or what can you be doing to kind of prepare yourself for hibernation is a good way to think about it, at least for me. What are some self-care things that you can kind of start to think about implementing in your life now so they become a practice or a habit and you are a little bit more prepared for the very natural sadness or gloom that kind of comes with the colder winter season?
Be proactive. Thinking about it now.
Yeah.
Yep. And so we don't want to end without reminding you can follow us on social media so that you don't miss an episode, or you can interact with us in that way. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/emh.nsc. That is for Embrace Mental Health, Not So Clinical. And instagram.com/embrace.mental.health. And you can also email us, so we invite you to please email us questions and comments and concerns so that we can have some back and forth with you with the podcast. Maybe we'll email you back, or maybe we'll answer your question on the podcast. Embrace Mental Health, nsc@gmail.com.
All right. Well, we will see everybody next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.